The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. Simone Rodriguez lay in the bed, her body aching from 8 hours of labor, her newborn daughter finally sleeping in her arms. Hope. She'd named her Hope because after everything, this baby represented a new beginning. The nurses had left her alone to rest, and the silence felt heavy. Her phone buzzed on the side table. Simone reached for it carefully, not wanting to wake the baby. A text from Brandon. Finally. He hadn't answered any of her calls during labor. Hadn't shown up at the hospital. She'd told herself he was probably dealing with something at work, some emergency that couldn't wait. She'd made excuses for him through every contraction. The text loaded. Your stupid bags are outside. Do not come back. I'm done with this marriage. Amber and I are together now. Don't contact me. Simone read it twice. 3 times. The words didn't change. Her hands started shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. The baby stirred against her chest and Simone forced herself to breathe, to stay quiet, to not scream. Another text came through. A photo. Their house. Her suitcases on the front porch. The door open. And in the doorway, a pregnant woman with blonde hair, her hand resting on a very visible belly. The woman was smiling. Simone's vision blurred. This couldn't be real. She'd just given birth. 8 hours of the worst pain she'd ever experienced. And her husband was texting her that she was homeless. That he'd replaced her. That another woman was already moved into their house. Their house that she'd helped buy. The mortgage she'd co-signed. The down payment that came from her savings. She looked down at Hope, perfect and tiny, completely innocent. This baby girl who would never know her father the way Simone had foolishly believed he would be. Devoted. Present. Loving. Mrs. Rodriguez? A nurse knocked and entered. Oh honey, what's wrong? Simone couldn't speak. She just handed over the phone. The nurse read the messages and her face went pale. Oh my God. Did he really, right after you gave birth? He didn't even come to the hospital, Simone whispered. Her voice sounded strange, disconnected. I've been calling him for 8 hours. He said he was working. He said he'd try to make it. Do you have someone you can call? Simone nodded slowly. Her mother. She could call her mother. 20 minutes later, Gloria Rodriguez stormed into that hospital room like a force of nature. She took one look at her daughter's face and knew. She read the texts and her expression turned to stone. That piece of garbage, Gloria said quietly, her voice shaking with rage. That absolute piece of garbage. Mom, what do I do? Simone felt tears finally coming. Where do I go? Everything I own is sitting on the porch. The house is in both our names. He can't just kick me out. You're coming home with me, Gloria said firmly. You and Hope both. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Right now you need to rest. I helped him build that business, Simone said, the reality crashing over her. I gave up my job to manage his accounts, to handle his scheduling, to be there while he networked and closed deals. I believed in him. Gloria sat on the bed carefully, putting her arm around her daughter. I know, baby. I know. Who's Amber? We'll find out everything. But not tonight. Tonight, you hold your beautiful daughter and you rest. The fight comes tomorrow. But Simone couldn't rest. Even after they moved her to her mother's house the next day, even after she'd settled Hope into the nursery her mother had set up, she couldn't stop thinking about that text. About the pregnant woman in her doorway. About Brandon's cold words. Your stupid bags are outside. Like she was trash. Like she was nothing. After 8 years of marriage. After supporting his dreams, managing his business affairs, being his partner in everything. She pulled up her phone and scrolled through their bank accounts. Her hands stopped shaking as she focused on the numbers. Something wasn't right. The business account showed different amounts than what Brandon had told her last week. The joint savings was nearly empty. Simone opened her laptop and started going through everything. Credit card statements. Business expenses. Bank transfers. The sun came up and Hope cried for feeding, and Simone mechanically nursed her while her eyes stayed locked on the screen. By the time her mother woke up, Simone had discovered something that made the betrayal even worse. Brandon hadn't just cheated on her. He'd been stealing from her for months. 3 days after giving birth, Simone sat at her mother's kitchen table surrounded by printed bank statements, business documents, and a timeline she'd been building since that text message destroyed her world. Hope slept in a bassinet next to her, and Gloria kept bringing her water and food she barely touched. Look at this, Simone said, pointing to a series of transfers. March 15th. He moved $20,000 from our joint savings to an account I've never seen before. March 22nd, another $15,000. April 10th, 30,000. Gloria leaned over her shoulder. You had that much in savings? We were supposed to be saving for Hope's college fund. For a bigger house. For our future. Simone's voice was flat, emotionless. She'd cried herself out the first 2 days. Now she was just angry. He told me the business was doing great, but we needed to be careful with personal spending. He said we should keep living modestly until we were really stable. While he was moving your money where exactly? I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out. Simone pulled up another document. And look at this. The business account. He told me we had 100,000 in operating capital. But according to these statements we have barely 30,000. Where did the rest go? Simone, you need a lawyer. I know. I already called one. Patricia Green. She's coming here tomorrow. Gloria looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. You're really doing this. Mom, he threw me away like garbage after I gave birth. He moved another pregnant woman into our house. He's been stealing our money. What else am I supposed to do? You're supposed to fall apart. You just had a baby. You're supposed to be resting, healing, adjusting to being a mother. I'll fall apart later, Simone said. Right now, I need to figure out how bad this is. She spent the rest of that day digging deeper. She found business expenses that made no sense. A charge for $50,000 labeled as equipment that was actually paid to a jewelry store. Trips to expensive hotels that Brandon said were client meetings but happened on weekends when no business was conducted. Cash withdrawals that added up to thousands of dollars with no explanation. The more she found, the clearer the picture became. Brandon hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been planning this for a long time. He'd been moving money, hiding assets, setting up a new life while Simone was pregnant with his child. When Patricia Green arrived the next afternoon, Simone had everything organized in folders, with color-coded tabs and detailed notes. Patricia was a tall black woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She sat down at the kitchen table, looked at the organized chaos of evidence, and let out a low whistle. You've been busy, Patricia said. I need to know my options, Simone replied. Patricia spent an hour going through everything. She asked questions, took notes, and occasionally shook her head in disgust. Finally, she sat back and looked at Simone directly. This is fraud, Patricia said simply. Not just divorce. Actual criminal fraud. He's been taking money from joint accounts without your knowledge or consent. He's been using business funds for personal expenses. And based on these discrepancies in the business accounts, I'd bet money he's been lying to his investors too. What does that mean for me? It means you have leverage. Good leverage. It also means this is going to get complicated. Patricia pulled out a legal pad. First, we file for divorce immediately. We claim abandonment, fraud, and request full custody with supervised visitation given his behavior. Second, we get a forensic accountant to go through everything and document exactly what he took and where it went. Third, we secure your assets before he can move anything else. I want him to face consequences, Simone said quietly. Not just in divorce court. Real consequences. Patricia nodded. Then we'll need to document everything carefully. If we can prove fraud, especially if he's been lying to business partners and investors, they can file charges. But you need to understand something, Simone. This is going to be a long fight. It's going to be ugly. And he's going to try to destroy you in the process. He already destroyed me, Simone said. He just doesn't know that I'm going to build something better from the pieces. After Patricia left, Simone stood at the window holding Hope, watching the sunset. Her body still ached from childbirth. Her breast hurt from nursing. She was exhausted in a way she'd never experienced before. But underneath all of that was something else. Determination. Brandon thought he could throw her away. He thought she was weak, dependent, easily discarded. He'd forgotten that she had a business degree. That she'd managed his accounts and understood his business better than he did. That she was smart, capable, and now extremely motivated. Your daddy made a mistake, she whispered to Hope. He thought I was nothing without him. He's about to find out how wrong he was. Jerome Taylor looked exactly like what Simone expected a private investigator to look like. Average height, average build, completely forgettable face. The kind of person who could blend into any crowd and never be noticed. Patricia had recommended him as the best in the city. They met at a coffee shop away from her mother's neighborhood. Simone brought Hope in a carrier, and Jerome didn't even blink at the newborn. Patricia says you need someone found and documented, Jerome said, stirring sugar into his coffee. My husband's mistress. Her name is Amber. I don't know her last name. She's pregnant. She's living in my house. Simone pulled out her phone and showed him the photo Brandon had sent. I need to know everything about her. How long they've been together. Where she came from. What her connection is to him. Jerome studied the photo. That's Amber Patterson. And this just got a lot more interesting. You know her? I know her father. Roger Patterson. He's one of your husband's business partners. Simone felt something cold settle in her stomach. Brandon's business partner's daughter. Yeah. And if I remember correctly, Roger Patterson invested about $200,000 into your husband's company about 18 months ago. The timeline clicked into place. 18 months ago. Right after Simone had gotten pregnant. Right when Brandon started becoming distant, distracted. When he started working late and going to business events without her because she was too tired, too sick from pregnancy, too boring. Find out everything, Simone said. When it started. Where they've been. How many people know about it? Everything. Jerome nodded. What are you planning to do with this information? I'm planning to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Brandon Rodriguez is. It took Jerome less than a week to compile a report that was 50 pages long. Simone sat on her mother's couch, Hope sleeping on her chest, and read through every page. The affair started at a company party 14 months ago. A party Simone hadn't attended because she was 6 months pregnant and exhausted. Brandon and Amber left together that night. Hotel receipts showed they'd been meeting at the same luxury hotel every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for the past year. Brandon had been spending money on Amber that should have been going into their savings. Jewelry, designer clothes, expensive dinners. All while telling Simone they needed to be careful with spending because the business was still growing. The offshore account transfers started 6 months ago. Right when Amber got pregnant. Brandon had been systematically moving money out of reach, preparing to leave Simone with nothing. But the worst part was what Jerome discovered about the business itself. Brandon had been inflating the company's assets to attract investors. He'd claimed the business was worth over $1 million when the actual value was less than half that. He'd used fake invoices and phantom clients to make the revenue look higher than it actually was. Roger Patterson and 2 other investors had put in money based on fraudulent numbers. This is securities fraud, Patricia said when Simone showed her the report. This goes way beyond divorce. If his investors find out, they can sue him. They can press criminal charges. Good, Simone said simply. You understand what this means? This will destroy his business, his reputation, his future. He destroyed mine when he sent that text message. He destroyed Hope's chance to have a father who's present and honest. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth. Patricia studied her client carefully. Simone had changed in the 2 weeks since that hospital room. The shock and devastation had hardened into something focused and unyielding. This wasn't just about anger anymore. This was about justice. What's your goal here? Patricia asked. What do you want to happen? Simone looked down at Hope, who was making little sleeping sounds against her chest. I want full custody. I want him to pay child support. I want a fair division of assets based on my contributions to his business. And I want him to face consequences for what he did. Not just to me. To everyone he lied to. That's going to take time. I have time. I have a newborn baby who needs her mother focused and strong. I have a future to build. And I have all the evidence we need to make sure Brandon Rodriguez never gets away with this. Jerome's report also included something Simone hadn't expected. Financial records showing Brandon's business was actually failing. Despite what he'd told investors, the company was losing money. The contracts he'd boasted about were either smaller than he'd claimed or didn't exist at all. He'd been using investor money to fund his personal lifestyle instead of growing the business. He was desperate. And desperate men made mistakes. Simone started planning her next move. She wouldn't just defend herself in divorce court. She would go on the offensive. She would rebuild her career, reclaim her financial independence, and make sure that every person Brandon had lied to knew the truth. But first she needed to secure her own future. Her own income. Her own path forward. I need to work, she told her mother that night. I can't just sit here waiting for the legal process to play out. I need to build something. Gloria looked at her daughter, holding her sleeping granddaughter, and saw the determination in her eyes. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that I spent 8 years helping Brandon build a business. I learned everything about business management, financial planning, client relations. I gave up my career to support his dream. Simone's voice was steady. Now I'm going to build my own dream. And it's going to be better than anything Brandon ever created. Patricia sat across from Simone at the kitchen table, legal documents spread between them. Hope was 1 month old now, and Simone had lost most of the pregnancy weight through stress and determination. She looked tired but focused. "I've drafted the divorce petition," Patricia said, sliding papers across the table. "Abandonment, fraud, requesting full custody with supervised visitation. I'm asking for 50% of the business value based on your contributions as an unpaid consultant and manager. Child support. And division of all marital assets." "What about the money he stole?" "That's documented separately. We're asking for full reimbursement plus damages." "But Simone, you need to understand something. Even if we win everything we're asking for, it might not amount to much if his business collapses." "Then I don't need his money," Simone said. "I need him to understand he can't just throw people away without consequences." Patricia nodded slowly. "I also prepared these letters. They're going to his business partners. Roger Patterson, Thomas Wade, and Jennifer Morrison. The three main investors. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm simply suggesting they might want to review their investment contracts and verify the financial information they received. You're lighting a fire under him. I'm protecting you. If his business fails and he declares bankruptcy, you won't get child support. But if his investors discover the fraud now, they can force him to liquidate assets to repay them. That means you might actually see some of your money returned." Simone signed the divorce papers without hesitation. Her signature was steady. That afternoon, she made another set of calls. These were to her old professional contacts, people she'd worked with before she'd married Brandon and put her own career on hold. She'd kept in touch casually over the years, but now she was reaching out with purpose. "Denise? This is Simone Rodriguez. I don't know if you remember me, but we worked together at Morrison Financial about 10 years ago." Denise Chin remembered her. They talked for 30 minutes about Simone's situation, though she kept the details vague. She was getting divorced. She was ready to return to the workforce. She had expertise in business management and financial planning. "Actually," Denise said, "I know someone who might need exactly your skills. Let me make a call." By the end of the week, Simone had 3 potential consulting opportunities. Small businesses that needed help organizing their finances, developing business plans, identifying inefficiencies. Nothing huge. Nothing glamorous. But it was a start. She hired a nanny. Rachel was a nursing student who needed flexible hours and extra income. She'd watch Hope while Simone worked, and Simone could nurse between meetings. It wasn't perfect, but it was possible. "You're really doing this," Gloria said, watching her daughter prepare for her first client meeting. "You just had a baby. Most women are still figuring out how to shower regularly." "Most women don't have a choice," Simone replied, straightening her blazer. "I need to prove I can support myself and Hope. And honestly, Mom, I need to prove it to myself. Brandon made me feel like I was nothing without him. Like I was just the support system for his dreams. I need to remember who I was before I became his wife." Her first client was a small restaurant owner who was struggling to keep track of expenses. Simone spent 3 hours going through his books, identifying problems, and creating a simple tracking system. It was basic work, but it felt good. It felt productive. The restaurant owner paid her $200. It was a fraction of what she used to make at her old job, but Simone looked at that check like it was $1 million. It was hers. She'd earned it with her own skills, her own knowledge. Meanwhile, Brandon's world was starting to crack. Jerome reported that Roger Patterson had hired his own investigator after receiving Patricia's letter. The other investors were asking questions about financial projections that didn't match actual revenue. Brandon's business partner, Thomas Wade, had quietly distanced himself from the company. And Amber had moved out of the house. Apparently she figured out that Brandon's money problems are real, Jerome told Simone during their weekly meeting. She went back to her father's house. "Roger Patterson is not happy about his daughter being pregnant by a married man who's also potentially defrauding him of $200,000. "Good," Simone said without sympathy. "You don't feel bad for her at all?" "She knew he was married. She moved into my house. She smiled for a picture while my things were thrown on the porch. No, I don't feel bad for her." Jerome nodded. "Fair enough. Just wanted to make sure you weren't having second thoughts." "About what?" "About burning his whole world down." Simone looked at Jerome steadily. "He burned mine first. I'm just making sure the fire spreads to everyone who deserves it." The divorce papers were served to Brandon at his office. According to Patricia's process server, he turned white reading them. He tried to call Simone immediately, but she'd blocked his number. All communication had to go through the lawyers. His lawyer sent a response 2 days later. Brandon was contesting everything. He claimed Simone had contributed nothing to the business. He wanted joint custody of Hope. He said the money he'd moved was his to move because he'd earned it. Patricia laughed reading the response. He's making this so much easier. Every claim he's making, we can disprove with documentation. When do we go to court? Preliminary hearing is in 3 weeks. But Simone, before that happens, I think we should reach out to his investors directly. Not as threats. As concerned parties who want to make sure everyone has accurate information. You want me to talk to them? I want you to show them exactly what you know. Let them decide what to do with that information. Simone thought about it. About facing Roger Patterson and telling him his daughter's boyfriend was a fraud. About showing these successful business people that they'd been lied to by someone they trusted. Set up the meetings, she said. I'll talk to anyone who wants to listen. That night, feeding hope in the quiet darkness, Simone allowed herself to think about what she was building. Not just revenge. Not just justice. She was building a future where she didn't need anyone to validate her worth. Where she could support herself and her daughter. Where she could hold her head high knowing she'd done the right thing even when it was hard. Brandon had thrown her away thinking she was nothing. He was about to discover that she was everything he'd never appreciated. And by the time she was done, everyone else would know it too. 2 months after that devastating text message, Simone stood in a small office space she'd rented in a shared building downtown. It wasn't much. 1 room, a desk, 2 chairs for clients. But it was hers. The sign on the door read, Rodriguez Consulting Services, Financial Management and Business Development. Hope was with Rachel, the nanny, back at Gloria's house. Simone had exactly 3 hours before she needed to pump and get back for feeding time. 3 hours to be a professional again. To be something more than a betrayed wife and exhausted new mother. Her first official client was a bakery owner named Mrs. Washington, a 70-year-old black woman who'd been running her business for 40 years but never had proper bookkeeping systems. My nephew says I need to modernize, Mrs. Washington said, settling into the chair with a sigh. Says I'm losing money because I don't track things right. But I've been doing it my way for 40 years. Your nephew is right, Simone said gently. But modernizing doesn't mean losing your way of doing things. It means making your way more efficient. Let me show you what I'm thinking. She spent 2 hours going through Mrs. Washington's handwritten ledgers, restaurant receipts, and scattered invoices. Then she showed her a simple digital system that would track the same information but make it searchable and analyzable. You'd be able to see exactly which items make you the most money, Simone explained. Which days are busiest. Which suppliers give you the best prices. All the things you know instinctively now, but in a format that helps you make better decisions. Mrs. Washington studied the proposal. How much do you charge? $200 to set up the system. Then $50 a month for maintenance and consultation. That's cheaper than my nephew quoted from some big consulting firm. I'm not a big firm. I'm one person who understands small businesses and wants to help them succeed. And honestly, Mrs. Washington, I need clients who'll give me references. So I'm keeping my prices reasonable while I build my reputation. Mrs. Washington smiled. You're honest? I like that. When can you start? By the end of that week, Simone had 3 clients. Mrs. Washington's bakery, a small law office that needed help organizing billing, and a construction company that was growing too fast to keep track of expenses manually. It wasn't enough to live on yet, but it was growing. She worked during Hope's nap times. She worked after the baby went to sleep at night. She worked in the early mornings before Hope woke up hungry. It was exhausting, but it was also energizing in a way she hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, the legal battle was intensifying. The preliminary hearing had been brutal. Brandon showed up with an expensive lawyer and an attitude. He lost weight. He looked stressed. His lawyer argued that Simone had been a stay-at-home wife by choice and had no claim to business assets. That she was being vindictive because of the affair. That she was trying to punish him financially. Patricia had calmly presented evidence. Email chains showing Simone managing client relationships. Financial documents with her signature on business decisions. Testimony from Brandon's own business partner about how Simone had been integral to operations. The judge had looked unimpressed with Brandon's arguments. Mr. Rodriguez, the judge had said, you sent your wife a text message telling her not to come home while she was in the hospital after giving birth to your child. You moved another woman into the marital home. And now you're arguing that your wife contributed nothing to your success? That's an interesting position to take. Brandon's lawyer had tried to recover, but the damage was done. The judge ordered temporary child support, gave Simone temporary full custody, and scheduled the full trial for 3 months out. But the real explosion came 2 weeks later. Roger Patterson called a meeting with all of Brandon's investors. Jerome had gotten wind of it and positioned himself nearby to observe. According to his report, Patterson had brought his own forensic accountant who'd been reviewing the business books. The numbers didn't match what Brandon had reported. Not even close. The business that was supposed to be worth over $1 million was actually worth less than $300,000. Revenue projections Brandon had used to attract investment were fabricated. Some of the major clients he'd claimed didn't exist. Others were much smaller contracts than he'd represented. Roger Patterson was threatening to sue. The other investors were backing him up. Brandon's business partner, Thomas Wade, had already filed paperwork to dissolve their partnership. "It's falling apart," Jerome reported to Simone. "His whole empire is crumbling." Simone felt no satisfaction, no joy, just a cold sense of justice being served. "What about Amber?" she asked. "Still living with her father. Still pregnant." Roger Patterson apparently told Brandon to stay away from his daughter and his money. "There's talk of a lawsuit there too." So Brandon has no business, no investors, no girlfriend, and a divorce trial coming up. Pretty much. He's going to have to get a regular job like everyone else. That night Simone got an email. It was from Denise, her old colleague, forwarding an article from a local business magazine. The headline read, "Local Business Under Investigation for Investor Fraud." It didn't name Brandon directly, but anyone in their business community would know who it was about. The article detailed allegations of inflated assets, fake revenue, and misused investor funds. It mentioned the ongoing divorce and the claims of financial misconduct. Simone's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Simone Rodriguez? This is Jennifer Chin from Business Leaders magazine. I'm writing a story about women who've overcome business and personal challenges. Your name came up as someone who might be interested in talking to me. How did you get my name? I've been researching the story that just broke about the investment fraud case. Your divorce filing is public record. And I heard through some sources that you're starting your own consulting business. I think our readers would be very interested in your perspective." Simone hesitated. Going public would mean exposing everything. But it would also mean controlling the narrative. "What exactly would you want me to talk about?" "Your experience. How you're rebuilding. What advice you'd give to other women in similar situations. This would be about your success, not his failure." "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Call me back when you're ready." Simone hung up and stared at her phone. She looked over at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. This was the moment where she could choose. She could stay quiet, handle everything privately, rebuild without attention. Or she could speak up. She could tell her story. She could help other women see that surviving betrayal was possible. She thought about that text message. About those bags on the porch. About being thrown away like she was nothing. Then she thought about her office. Her 3 clients. Her growing confidence. Her beautiful daughter. Her future. She picked up the phone and called Jennifer Chin back. "I'll do the interview," Simone said. "But I have some conditions. This story focuses on where I'm going, not where I've been. It talks about building a business as a single mother. About financial independence. About moving forward." "That's exactly what I want to write about," Jennifer said. "When can we meet?" "I have an hour tomorrow afternoon. Between client meetings." After she hung up, Simone felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This wasn't just about making Brandon pay. This was about reclaiming her narrative. About showing the world that being thrown away didn't mean she was worthless. It meant she was free to build something better. The article came out on a Wednesday morning. Simone's phone started ringing at 6 a.m. "Women Rebuilding, How One Mother Turned Betrayal into Business Success," was the headline. Jennifer Chin had written a powerful piece that focused on Simone's consulting business, her clients, her vision for helping small businesses avoid financial mismanagement. It mentioned the divorce only in passing as context for her journey. But it was enough. The business community was small, and everyone knew who the article was really about. By noon, Simone had received 6 emails from potential clients. By 3 p.m., 2 local news stations wanted interviews. By evening, her phone was overwhelmed with messages. "This is insane," Gloria said, watching her daughter field calls while nursing Hope. "You're going viral." "I'm not going viral. I'm just being honest about what happened." But it was more than that. Simone's story had hit a nerve. Women all over the city were sharing the article, tagging friends, writing comments about their own experiences with financial abuse and betrayal. Some shared stories about husbands who'd controlled money. Others talked about rebuilding after divorce. The article had become more than just Simone's story. It had become a rallying cry. Meanwhile, Brandon's world continued its spectacular collapse. Roger Patterson filed a civil lawsuit against him for fraud and misrepresentation. Thomas Wade dissolved their business partnership publicly, releasing a statement that distanced himself from any financial wrongdoing. The two other investors joined Patterson's lawsuit. Local business media covered it extensively. Brandon's name was now permanently associated with fraud and deception. His LinkedIn profile was flooded with angry comments from former clients and colleagues. His business essentially ceased to exist. Jerome reported that Brandon had been forced to sell the house. The house Simone had helped buy. The house where he'd moved Amber. The house where Simone's bags had been thrown on the porch. He's renting a small apartment now, Jerome said. Working for a mid-level consulting firm doing basic financial analysis. Making about $60,000 a year. Which is a long way down from the lifestyle he was living. What about Amber? Still with her father. Word is she's planning to move to another state after the baby is born. Wants to get away from the whole situation. Simone felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. Amber was pregnant and alone too. But then she remembered that photo. The smile on Amber's face. The hand on her belly standing in Simone's doorway. No. Amber had made her choices. She could live with them. The divorce trial was scheduled for the following month. Patricia was confident they'd win everything they asked for. The evidence was overwhelming. Brandon's fraud was documented. His affair was proven. His abandonment was literally written in text messages that multiple people had seen. He might try to settle, Patricia warned. Offer you something to avoid trial. What do you want to do if that happens? What would he offer? Probably full custody to you, basic child support, maybe a small settlement. He'll want to avoid the public spectacle of a trial. Simone thought about it. About standing in a courtroom and presenting all the evidence of his betrayal. About making a public record. About the satisfaction of hearing a judge rule in her favor. But she also thought about hope. About building her business. About moving forward instead of staying stuck in the past. If he offers full custody, appropriate child support based on his current income, and compensation for the money he stole from our accounts, I'll consider it, Simone said. But I want it in writing. I want it legally binding. And I want supervised visitation until Hope is old enough to decide for herself if she wants to see him. That's reasonable. I'll let his lawyer know we're open to settlement discussions. A week later, Brandon's lawyer called with an offer. It was close to what Simone wanted. Full custody. Child support set at 15% of his income, adjustable if his income changed. $20,000 as compensation for the money he'd taken from their accounts. Supervised visitation twice a month. He's also agreeing to cover your legal fees, Patricia added. That's another $15,000. Simone looked at the proposal. It wasn't everything she could fight for, but it was enough. It was fair. And more importantly, it meant she could close this chapter and move on. I'll take it, she said. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks before the scheduled trial date. Simone signed the papers in Patricia's office, with Hope sleeping in a carrier beside her. You did it, Patricia said. You protected yourself and your daughter. You got justice. I got what I needed, Simone corrected. Justice is something different. But that night, when the settlement check arrived, Simone did feel something like justice. She'd been thrown away with nothing. Now she had legal custody of Hope, financial support, and compensation for what was stolen. More than that, she had her business, her independence, her future. She deposited the check the next morning. $20,000. She put half of it in a savings account for Hope. The other half went toward business expenses, better office space, marketing, a website, investment in her future. Rodriguez Consulting Services was growing faster than she'd expected. She now had 8 clients. She'd hired an assistant to handle scheduling and basic bookkeeping. She was making more money than she'd anticipated for her first few months in business. And she was happy. Not in the naive way she'd been happy during her marriage, believing in a future that was built on lies. This was a different kind of happy. Real. Based on what she'd built with her own hands. The local business magazine that had published Jennifer Chen's article called again. They wanted to do a follow-up piece about her consulting success. They wanted to profile her as one of the city's emerging business leaders. Simone agreed. Not because she wanted fame or attention, but because she remembered what it felt like to believe she was nothing without Brandon. To think that her value came from being his support system. If her story could help even one other woman realize she had worth beyond her relationship, beyond what someone else told her she was, then it was worth sharing. The photographer for the magazine shoot suggested they do some photos in her office. Simone agreed. She wore a professional blazer, held hope on her hip, and smiled for the camera. Not the fake smile she'd worn in her marriage photos. A real smile. Tired but genuine. The photographer showed her the images. In them, Simone saw a woman who looked strong, capable, a mother and a business owner. Someone who'd survived something terrible and come out better. "These are perfect," the photographer said. "You look powerful." Simone looked at the photos again. At herself holding her daughter, standing in the office she'd built, wearing the confidence she'd earned. "Yeah," she said softly. "I guess I do." Even though they'd settled the divorce, there was still the matter of the investor lawsuit. Roger Patterson and the other investors wanted their day in court, and they wanted Simone to testify about Brandon's business practices. She agreed without hesitation. The civil trial started on a cold morning in November. Hope was 4 months old, sitting with Gloria in the courthouse hallway while Simone prepared to take the stand. Patricia sat with her even though this wasn't technically her case anymore. They'd become friends through the process. "You don't have to be nervous," Patricia said. "Just tell the truth. Answer the questions directly. Don't elaborate unless asked." "I'm not nervous," Simone said. And it was true. She'd been nervous for the divorce proceedings, worried about seeing Brandon again. But this was different. This was about accountability for everyone he'd lied to, not just her. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. Roger Patterson sat with his lawyers on one side. Brandon sat alone on the other side with a public defender. He couldn't afford his expensive lawyer anymore. When Simone walked in, Brandon looked up. They made eye contact for the first time since that hospital room. He looked terrible. Thin, haggard, defeated. She felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no sympathy. He was just a stranger who'd made bad choices. The plaintiff's lawyer called her to the stand. Simone was sworn in and took her seat. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the lawyer began, "can you describe your involvement in your ex-husband's business?" "I managed most of the administrative operations," Simone said clearly. "I handled client communications, maintained financial records, managed scheduling for meetings and projects. I also reviewed business proposals and contracts before Brandon signed them." "Did you receive compensation for this work?" "No. Brandon said we were building the business together and would both benefit from its success. He said keeping me off the official payroll reduced expenses and made the business look more profitable to potential investors." "Did you have access to the business financial records?" "Yes. I maintained them. I updated the accounting software, tracked expenses, recorded revenue." "And did the numbers you recorded match the financial projections Mr. Rodriguez presented to investors?" Simone looked directly at the lawyer. "No. The actual revenue was significantly lower than what he told investors. The client base was smaller than he reported. Many of the future contracts he mentioned to investors didn't exist or were much smaller than he claimed." "Did you discuss these discrepancies with him?" "Yes. He told me that investors expected optimistic projections, that it was normal to present the best possible scenario. He said once we actually landed those clients, the numbers would match." "Did that happen?" "No. The major clients he'd promised never materialized. The revenue stayed flat or declined. But he kept reporting growth to the investors." Brandon's lawyer objected several times, but the judge allowed most of Simone's testimony. She had the records. She had the emails. She had proof of everything she was saying. When Brandon's lawyer cross-examined her, he tried to paint Simone as a vindictive ex-wife who was exaggerating problems to hurt her former husband. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Rodriguez, that you're angry about the divorce?" "I was devastated by the divorce," Simone corrected. "But my testimony isn't about anger. It's about facts. I have documentation of everything I've said." "But you didn't think anything was wrong while you were married?" "I trusted my husband. When he explained the discrepancies, I believed him. I thought he knew better than I did about business projections and investor relations. I was wrong to trust him, but that doesn't change what actually happened." The lawyer tried a few more times to shake her testimony, but Simone remained calm and consistent. She'd lived through the worst betrayal of her life. A courtroom cross-examination wasn't going to rattle her. When she stepped down, Roger Patterson nodded at her respectfully. She'd given him the testimony he needed. Brandon took the stand next. His lawyer tried to argue that the discrepancies were honest mistakes, that Brandon had truly believed the business would grow to match his projections, that he'd never intended to defraud anyone. But the prosecution had Simone's records. They had emails where Brandon had explicitly lied about client contracts. They had documentation of him moving investor money into personal accounts. They had proof that he'd known exactly what he was doing. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Brandon liable for fraud and misrepresentation. They ordered him to repay the investor money plus damages. The total was over $300,000. Brandon didn't have $300,000. His business was gone. His assets were minimal. The judgment would follow him for years, probably decades. His credit was destroyed. His reputation was demolished. Simone watched him leave the courtroom with his public defender, looking small and broken. She waited to feel something. Victory. Satisfaction. Relief. Instead, she just felt tired. "You did good in there," Patricia said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "I just told the truth. That's what doing good looks like." Outside the courthouse, Hope was crying. Gloria handed her over, and Simone held her daughter close, feeling the weight and warmth of her. "This is done now?" Gloria asked. "The legal part is done," Simone said. "Now I just focus on building our future." That night, local news covered the verdict. They didn't mention Simone by name, but they talked about the betrayed wife who'd helped build the case against her fraudulent ex-husband. They talked about investor fraud and the consequences of business deception. Simone's phone buzzed with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. Some offering support. Some asking for details. Some sharing their own stories of betrayal and recovery. She answered a few, but mostly she just sat with Hope, feeding her and rocking her and thinking about how far they'd come. For months ago, she'd been in a hospital room reading a text message that destroyed her world. Now she was in her mother's living room, holding her daughter, running a successful business, and watching her ex-husband face consequences for his actions. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the happily ever after she'd believed in when she'd married Brandon. But it was hers. Built on truth instead of lies. Based on her own work instead of someone else's promises. Real instead of fake. And that, Simone realized, was its own kind of happy ending. 6 months after the trial, Simone stood in her new office space. Not the single room she'd started with, but an actual suite. 2 private offices, a conference room, a reception area. Rodriguez Consulting Services had 15 employees now. Accountants, business analysts, marketing specialists. People who believed in what she was building. Hope was 8 months old, sitting in a playpen in Simone's office while she reviewed proposals. The business had evolved beyond basic bookkeeping. Now they helped small businesses develop complete financial strategies, identify growth opportunities, avoid the kind of fraud and mismanagement that had destroyed Brandon's company. Simone. Her assistant Jordan knocked on the door. "The reporter from Metro Business is here for your interview." The interview was about Simone's business success, but also about something bigger. She was launching a foundation called Second Chances. It would provide business education, financial planning resources, and small grants to single mothers trying to start their own businesses. The foundation was funded partly by her business profits and partly by donations from other business owners who'd heard her story. The first class of recipients would be announced next month. 20 women would receive business training, seed money, and mentorship to help them build financial independence. "I was once in that position," Simone told the reporter. "Suddenly single with a baby, needing to rebuild everything from nothing. I was lucky. I had education, experience, a mother who could help with childcare. Not everyone has those advantages. This foundation is about giving women the tools they need to support themselves and their children." The reporter, a young black man named Terry, took notes quickly. "Your ex-husband was recently in the news again. He filed for bankruptcy protection. Does that affect your child support?" "Child support is calculated based on his current income, whatever that is. But Hope and I don't depend on that money. It goes into a savings account for her future. We're fine on our own." "Do you ever regret how public everything became?" Simone thought about the question carefully. "I regret that Hope will grow up seeing those articles and knowing what happened. But I don't regret being honest about my experience. A lot of women have reached out to tell me my story helped them recognize their own situations. Some left abusive marriages. Some started their own businesses. If my worst moment helped someone else avoid the same situation, then it was worth being public." After the interview, Simone attended a consultation with a new client. It was a small tech startup run by 3 women who needed help organizing their finances for a potential investor meeting. "We don't want to end up like that guy who defrauded his investors," one of them said. "We want to be completely transparent and honest about what we have and what we're projecting." Simone spent 2 hours reviewing their books, their projections, their business plan. Everything was solid, honest, realistic. "You're doing everything right," she told them. "Your numbers are conservative but achievable. Your projections are based on actual data. Any investor who looks at this will see you're serious and trustworthy." "That's what we want," the founder said. "We've heard too many stories about startups that inflate numbers and crash later. We want to build something sustainable." After the meeting, Simone checked her phone. A text from Jerome, the private investigator who'd become a friend through the process. "Saw the article about your foundation. Impressive. You're really doing it." "Doing what?" she texted back. "Building something better than what you lost." That night, putting hope to bed, Simone thought about Brandon. Not with anger or hurt anymore. Just curiosity about what his life looked like now. According to legal documents, he was working as a junior analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm, making about $50,000 a year, living in a small apartment. His bankruptcy had wiped out most of his debt, but his reputation was permanently damaged. Amber had moved to California after giving birth. Jerome had mentioned it in passing. She'd had a boy. Brandon had signed away his parental rights to that child. He'd never met his son. But he had court-ordered visitation with Hope. Twice a month, supervised visits at a family center. According to the supervisor's reports, Brandon was trying. He showed up on time. He brought appropriate toys. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know his daughter. Simone didn't know how she felt about that. Part of her was glad Hope would know her father, even in this limited way. Part of her was still angry that he'd thrown them away so easily. But mostly she was just focused on her own life. On her business. On her daughter. On the foundation she was building to help other women. The next morning, she had breakfast with Patricia. They'd stayed close after the legal cases ended. Patricia had become a mentor and friend. "I have something to tell you," Patricia said, sipping her coffee. "I'm joining your board of directors for the foundation. Pro bono legal services. I want to make sure everything is set up properly to protect the women you're helping." Simone felt tears prick her eyes. "Patricia, you don't have to do that." "I know. I want to. What you're building matters. And honestly, working with you reminded me why I went into law in the first place. To help people who need it." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I'm going to be demanding about making sure everything is done right. Proper contracts, clear guidelines, legal protections for everyone involved. That's exactly what I need." Later that day, Simone had a meeting with the bank about expansion financing. Rodriguez Consulting Services was profitable enough to open a second location. She was thinking about a satellite office in the suburbs, serving small businesses that needed the same services she provided downtown. The loan officer, a middle-aged white man who'd been skeptical when she'd first started the business, now looked at her with respect. "Your financials are impressive," he said. "Revenue growth of 300% in 8 months. Strong client retention. Positive cash flow. I see no reason why we can't approve this expansion loan." Simone signed the paperwork, remembering when she'd had to beg Brandon for access to their joint account. When she'd had to ask permission to spend money she'd helped earn. When her name hadn't been on anything that mattered. Now her name was on everything. Her business. Her office lease. Her bank accounts. Her daughter's birth certificate. Her foundation paperwork. She'd rebuilt her life on her own terms in her own name with her own power. That evening she received an unexpected email. It was from Roger Patterson, the investor Brandon had defrauded. "Ms. Rodriguez, I wanted to reach out personally to tell you that I admire what you've built. My daughter made poor choices and so did your ex-husband. But you handled everything with integrity and grace. I'm making a donation to your foundation, and I'd like to discuss potentially partnering on a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs. If you're interested, please let me know." Simone read the email twice. Roger Patterson had lost $200,000 to Brandon's fraud. His daughter had been involved in the affair that destroyed Simone's marriage. And now he wanted to support her work. She replied, "Mr. Patterson, thank you for your kind words. I'd be very interested in discussing a mentorship program. Let's schedule a meeting." Because that was the thing about moving forward. You didn't have to carry the anger forever. You didn't have to let the betrayal define you. You could take what happened, learn from it, and build something better. Brandon had thrown her away thinking she was worthless without him. He'd been wrong. She'd always had value. She just needed to remember it herself. Now, 8 months after that text message destroyed her world, Simone was happier and more successful than she'd ever been during her marriage. She had a thriving business, a daughter she adored, a foundation that would help other women, friends who respected her, a future that was entirely her own creation. Brandon had given her freedom when he'd sent those bags outside. He just hadn't realized that's what he was doing. And for that, Simone was almost grateful. 1 year after receiving that devastating text message, Simone Rodriguez sat in a television studio, microphone clipped to her blazer, waiting to be interviewed for a morning business show. Hope was backstage with Gloria, playing with toys and babbling happily. 2 minutes, the producer said. Simone took a deep breath. She'd done dozens of interviews over the past year, but this one was different. This was national television. This was her story, reaching beyond their city, beyond their community, to women everywhere who might need to hear it. The host, a polished woman named Michelle, smiled warmly as the cameras started rolling. Today we're talking with Simone Rodriguez, founder of Rodriguez Consulting Services and the Second Chances Foundation. Simone, your story has inspired thousands of women. Can you tell us where you were a year ago? Simone spoke clearly, honestly. She talked about being in the hospital after giving birth, about the text message, about discovering the fraud, about the moment she decided to rebuild instead of giving up. What I want women to understand, Simone said, is that being thrown away doesn't mean you're worthless. Sometimes it means you're being freed from something that was holding you back. My ex-husband thought he was discarding me. Actually, he was releasing me to become who I was always capable of being. Your business has grown significantly in just 1 year. We now have 22 employees in 2 locations. We serve over 100 small businesses across the state. But more importantly, our foundation has helped 35 single mothers start their own businesses. That's 35 women who now have financial independence and are modeling success for their children. Your ex-husband recently gave an interview where he said he regrets how he handled things. Have you spoken with him? Simone had seen that interview. Brandon looking somber, talking about making mistakes, wanting to be a better father to Hope. She'd felt nothing watching it. We only communicate through the supervised visitation center, Simone said. He's having a relationship with our daughter, which is what matters. But he and I have nothing to discuss. I've moved forward, and I encourage him to do the same. After the interview, Simone's phone exploded with messages. Women sharing their own stories, asking for advice, thanking her for being honest. Some were still in the middle of their own betrayals, looking for hope. Others were years into their recovery, celebrating their own successes. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Crystal. I saw your interview. My husband just told me he wants a divorce so he can be with his co-worker. I have 2 kids and no job because I've been staying home like he wanted. I'm terrified. But watching you gave me hope. If you can rebuild, maybe I can too. Simone wrote back immediately, you absolutely can. And you don't have to do it alone. Contact my foundation. We have resources that can help. The foundation had evolved beyond what Simone had initially imagined. They now offered business classes, financial planning workshops, legal consultations, and networking events. They'd partnered with 3 universities to provide scholarships for single mothers pursuing business degrees. They'd helped women start everything from catering companies to marketing agencies to technology consultants. The most recent foundation event had been a graduation ceremony for their first complete business program. 20 women who'd spent 6 months learning business fundamentals, developing business plans, and receiving mentorship. All 20 had either started businesses or secured good jobs. All 20 were supporting their children independently. Simone had watched them walk across that stage receiving their certificates and felt something she'd never felt during her marriage. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Pride in accomplishment that belonged to her alone. Brandon had attended Hope's first birthday party. It was technically his visitation day, and Simone had agreed to let him come to Gloria's house for the celebration. He brought a gift. He'd been polite and distant. He'd held Hope awkwardly, like he wasn't quite sure what to do with her. Simone had watched him interact with their daughter and felt sad for Hope. This man was her father, but he'd never really know her. He'd chosen a different path, and now he was a stranger showing up twice a month for supervised visits. Do you think he'll ever change? Gloria had asked later. I don't know, Simone had replied honestly. And it doesn't matter to me anymore. All that matters is that Hope has what she needs. A stable home. A mother who loves her. Opportunities to grow and thrive. Now, a few months after that birthday party, Simone was preparing for the foundation's 2nd annual gala. It was a fundraising event that would support the next year of programming. Local business leaders were buying tables. Several companies were becoming corporate sponsors. The mayor was speaking. "You've built something remarkable," Patricia said, reviewing the event budget. "From nothing to this in just over a year." "Not from nothing," Simone corrected. "From disaster. From the worst moment of my life. But you're right that it's remarkable." The gala was held at a nice hotel downtown. 300 people attended. Business leaders, foundation supporters, program graduates, women currently enrolled in courses. The energy was electric. Simone gave a speech about the foundation's impact. She introduced several graduates who shared their stories. A woman who'd started a successful cleaning business. Another who'd become a financial planner. A third who'd launched a bakery. "These women aren't success stories," Simone said. "They're success in progress. They're working hard every day to build better lives for themselves and their families. They're proving that one bad situation doesn't define your future. That betrayal can be the beginning of something better." During dinner, Roger Patterson approached her table. They'd been working together for several months on the mentorship program, but this was the first time he'd brought up the personal history. "I want to apologize," he said quietly. "My daughter made choices that hurt you deeply. I know I'm not responsible for her actions, but as her father, I feel I should have raised her to have better character. I'm sorry for the pain she caused you and your daughter." Simone looked at him steadily. "Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. But honestly, I don't think about your daughter anymore. I don't think about that period of my life except as the starting point for where I am now. Still, I wanted you to know. And I want you to know that what you're building matters. These women you're helping. The lives you're changing. It matters. That's what keeps me going," Simone said. "Knowing that my worst experience can help prevent someone else's worst experience. Or at least give them tools to survive it." Later that night, after the gala ended successfully and she'd said goodbye to the last attendees, Simone sat in her car in the parking lot. Hope was asleep in her car seat. The city lights reflected off the windshield. She thought about where she'd been a year ago. Devastated. Betrayed. Thrown away like garbage. She'd had nothing except her daughter and her mother's support. Now she had a business that employed 22 people. A foundation that was changing lives. Financial security she'd built with her own skills. Respect from her community. Pride in her accomplishments. And most importantly, she had peace. Not the naive peace of ignorance she'd had in her marriage. Real peace. The kind that came from knowing she could survive anything because she'd already survived the worst. Brandon had thought destroying her was easy. He'd thought sending that text message would be the end of her story. He'd been wrong. It had been the beginning. 2 years after that text message, Simone stood on a stage at the city's convention center, accepting the Business Leader of the Year award. Rodriguez Consulting Services was now one of the fastest-growing firms in the state. The Second Chances Foundation had helped over 100 women start businesses or achieve financial independence. Hope, now 2 years old, sat in the front row with Gloria, waving at her mother on stage. Simone waved back, smiling. "When I started this business," Simone said into the microphone, "I was broke, heartbroken, and had a newborn baby. I had every reason to give up. But I also had something more powerful than reasons to quit. I had reasons to fight. My daughter needed me to be strong. Other women needed to see that survival was possible. And honestly, I needed to prove to myself that I was more than what someone else said I was." The audience applauded. In it were her employees, her clients, foundation graduates, business partners, friends she'd made during this journey. Patricia sat in the front row next to Gloria, both of them beaming with pride. "This award isn't just for me," Simone continued. "It's for every woman who's been told she's worthless. Every mother who's had to rebuild from nothing. Every person who's been betrayed and chose to become better instead of bitter. This is for all of us." After the ceremony, reporters wanted interviews. Simone gave several, talking about business growth, the foundation's impact, her vision for the future. She'd gotten comfortable with media attention, learned how to use her platform to amplify messages about financial independence and business ethics. One reporter asked about Brandon. She hadn't been asked about him in months. Most people had moved on to focusing on Simone's success rather than her past. "My ex-husband and I share a daughter," Simone said simply. "He sees her regularly now through supervised visits. Beyond that, we have no relationship. I wish him well, but my focus is on my own future and my daughter's future." What she didn't say was that Brandon's visits had become more consistent lately. He'd paid off some of his debt through the bankruptcy. He'd been promoted to a senior analyst position. He was slowly rebuilding his own life, though he'd never recover the reputation or success he'd once had. He'd sent Simone a letter 2 months ago. She'd almost thrown it away unread, but curiosity had won. Simone, it had said, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. What I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that watching what you've built has taught me something. Success that's built on lies always crumbles. But success built on hard work and integrity lasts. You've become the person I pretended to be. I hope someday Hope will be proud of both her parents, even if I have a lot of work to do to deserve that. Thank you for being an excellent mother to our daughter. Simone had read it once and filed it away. It wasn't an apology she needed. She'd already moved past needing anything from Brandon. But it was acknowledgement, and that was something. Now, at the awards ceremony, she celebrated with her team. They went to dinner at a nice restaurant, everyone laughing and sharing stories about funny client moments and successful projects. Simone looked around the table at the people she'd hired, the business she'd built, the family she'd created from colleagues and friends. This was what victory looked like. Not revenge. Not watching Brandon suffer. But building something meaningful that helped people and brought her genuine satisfaction. The foundation had just announced its next major initiative, a partnership with 3 community colleges to offer free business courses to single mothers. They'd secured funding from corporate sponsors and private donors. The first classes would start in 3 months, with an expected enrollment of 200 women. You're changing the world, Patricia had told her when they'd finalized the partnership agreements. I'm changing what I can reach, Simone had replied. One woman at a time. One business at a time. One success story at a time. A few days after the award ceremony, Simone met with a reporter who was writing a book about women entrepreneurs. They talked for 2 hours about business strategy, work-life balance, the foundation's impact. At the end, the reporter asked, if you could go back to that hospital room 2 years ago, what would you tell yourself? Simone thought carefully. I tell myself that pain is temporary, but what you build from it can last forever. I tell myself that being thrown away by someone who didn't value me was actually a gift, even though it didn't feel like it. And I tell myself that Hope and I would not just survive but thrive. Do you think your ex-husband regrets what he did? I think he regrets the consequences, Simone said honestly. But I don't spend time wondering about his feelings. That's not where my energy goes anymore. Where does your energy go? Into being the best mother I can be to Hope. Into growing my business ethically and sustainably. Into helping other women discover their own strength. Into building a legacy that's based on integrity and hard work. That night, tucking Hope into bed, Simone read her daughter a story about a princess who saved herself. Hope's favorite book. She loved the part where the princess decided she didn't need rescuing and built her own castle instead. Just like Mama, Hope said in her toddler voice. Just like Mama, Simone agreed, kissing her daughter's forehead. After Hope fell asleep, Simone sat on her porch looking at the stars. She lived in a beautiful house now, one she'd bought with her own money. It had a big backyard for Hope to play in, an office where Simone could work from home, and enough space for them to grow. She thought about that text message sometimes. Your stupid bags are outside. Do not come back. Those words had destroyed her world. But they'd also freed her to build a better one. She'd learned that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was creation. Building something so good, so successful, so meaningful that the person who'd thrown you away became irrelevant. Not because you'd beaten them, but because you'd moved so far forward they couldn't see you anymore. Brandon was still stuck in the consequences of his choices. Simone was soaring in the freedom of hers. She'd chosen to fight, to rebuild, to become the person she was always capable of being. And in doing so, she discovered something powerful. Happiness wasn't about what someone else gave you. It was about what you built for yourself. 2 years ago, Simone had been in a hospital room holding a newborn and reading the worst text message of her life. Today she was a business leader, a foundation founder, a respected member of her community, and most importantly, a mother who was showing her daughter what real strength looked like. That was victory. Not revenge, but transformation. Not getting back at Brandon, but getting so far ahead of him that he became a footnote in her success story instead of the chapter that defined her. She turned her worst moment into her greatest triumph. And that was the best revenge of all.